Welcome to Whatever It Takes, Tackling the Housing Affordability Crisis. My name is Ben Metcalf, and I'm a professor here at Berkeley in the Department of City and Regional Planning. I direct the Terner Center for Housing Innovation and Terner's innovation arm, Terner Labs. It's my great pleasure to kick off what will be a really fantastic program this evening, including a fantastic talk by my colleague Carolina, an amazing panel, and a good opportunity for reflecting on the housing crisis that we find ourselves in today. But first things first, I want to introduce Mark Fisher, University of California, Berkeley's Vice Chancellor of Administration, to open us formally. Mark has been with UC Berkeley since 2017, leading on the full suite of support services that allow all of our great teaching and public service and research to happen. Mark, please come on up. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ben. And clearly this is the place to be. A room that has that sort of buzz and energy is a lot of fun to be able to join. So good evening and welcome for everyone for coming. For those of you who don't know me, I am Mark Fisher, Vice Chancellor of Administration, as Ben just said, and I'm here this evening on behalf of Chancellor Rich Lyons, who was unfortunately unable to attend. Just as a side note, I'm an architect and landscape architect by training and licensed architect, so this is right in my wheelhouse. I'm really, really excited to be able to participate. Okay, as we all know, California grapples with a severe housing shortage, a crisis that profoundly impacts communities statewide and our own campus community in Berkeley. And across the state, we're seeing visible homelessness, flight of working families, and loss of businesses. This is a problem that hits home in a powerful way for this campus. Too many of our students have experienced homelessness, and we have the lowest rate of on-campus housing of any UC campus. Affordable student housing is a top priority for the university, and we know that the housing challenges facing our students, staff, and faculty are interconnected with a wider housing crisis in California. UC Berkeley has an obligation to leverage its talents, resources, land, and research to be part of the solution. That's why I'm excited to congratulate the Terner Center for Housing Innovation on its 10-year anniversary. Congratulations. Over the last decade, the center has been an important thought leader in the housing field and plays a key role of connecting research to policymakers and practice and cultivating the next generation of student leaders. The Terner Center's importance as a thought leader in the housing field cannot be overstated and is emblematic of what UC Berkeley can do, raising the bar for other campuses. And I'm sorry, I just moved that screen. Taking on impactful work that influences student education, produces rigorous research, and serves campus and community. And perhaps most importantly, the center has trained, guided, and mentored over 100 students who've helped at every stage of the research process. These students have gone on to build accomplished careers in the housing arena, in affordable and market rate housing development, research, policy, lending, and government. All of this work could not be done without the support of all of you that recognize the value of cutting-edge research and student mentorship. I'm excited to see what the next 10 years will bring. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Mark, for those kind, inspiring words. We all really do appreciate your leadership and your work with Chancellor Lyons on these housing issues, and that commitment from the university really matters. As Mark mentioned, yes, we are celebrating 10 years of Terner this evening, and several of you who were involved in its founding are here in the audience this evening, which is quite fun. This event also marks another milestone of note. 30 years, 3 decades since the passing of our namesake, Don Terner, who died in 1996. Many of you don't know Don, who are here with us today. Some of you know him very, very well. He was a visionary. He worked in housing his whole life, including stints as California's housing director at Bridge Housing, which he founded here at Cal, where he played a formative role as a professor of architecture and associate dean at the College of Environmental Design. His legacy looms large, particularly as we reflect on the past 10 years of Terner Center and his 30 years, respectively. And our panel and talk today takes inspiration from him specifically. In fact, the title, Whatever It Takes, are his words that we are borrowing this evening. His commitment to reframing the narrative around how we talk and think about housing affordability, and his indomitable, fearless push for innovative but scalable solutions anchors how we have structured the conversation that will follow. We have a short video to connect that piece of history to the substance of our event this evening, and perhaps to offer a bit of a call of action.
Oftentimes I describe Don as a kind of person that dropped a rock in the lake and there were a lot of ripples. And in my case, it was a cannonball that hit the lake. He had such a powerful force, and he just is probably the most dynamic and interesting person I ever met.
Don did a lot of things in his early years. He managed to get 3 degrees from Harvard. While he was there, he founded a nonprofit company in New York, Urban Habitat, UHAB. He got his students from MIT to go to New York to help people rehab buildings. Don understood that the American dream means healthcare, education, and housing.
The cop, the fireman, the teacher, the nurse, the retail clerk, the entry-level professional, the industrial worker, you name it, the backbone of the economy in our market is being priced out.
I met Don when I moved to California to go to UC Berkeley, and Don was a professor of architecture there. And I took a class from him. The things I remember most were just his dynamism, his energy, his drive. You could feel it even in the classroom.
I wanted to really get his attention because he was the kind of professor that always had people outside of his door lined up waiting to talk to him. And Don was discovered through some of that process by then Governor Brown and was asked to be the director of housing for the state.
He understood that because Reagan was in office, the time of federal government subsidy to build housing was over. And so now is an opportunity to figure out creative ways to do public-private partnerships with local and state government.
So he looked a lot at zoning and density, accessory dwelling units, ways to make that easier, changing of building codes.
In December of '82, Don was basically looking for something else. And as luck would have it, the San Francisco Foundation got an anonymous gift of about $500,000. The donor said, do something about affordable housing. And so Don and I got recruited and hired the same day to start Bridge Housing.
It puts a tremendous responsibility on us as a national model to spend it well, to spend it efficiently and productively and wisely, to make something really happen on the ground.
Within Bridge, we were working on some very ambitious developments that were beyond just the housing component. One of the most important things as a development that he did was Marin City.
What we're trying to do is build an entire community, not just buildings, but buildings, jobs, and services. There are going to be 200 permanent jobs here.
Don woke up every morning smiling. He jumped out of bed. He was so excited to wake up in the morning and go to work. But he was excited about all the other things in his life too. He was excited about his kids. He left a wonderful family legacy behind.
The effect of his loss was dramatic. What do we do now? Where do we go without Don?
The only way to make sense of it is to say, well, his energy, which is pretty powerful, has got to be galvanized in all of us.
I thought, what better place than to come back to Berkeley at the College of Environmental Design, do active research, how we can build better, build more affordably, change our systems and our policies. And there is no other person who I would ever think to name this after than Don Terner, because he is the spirit of that driving innovation. I'm really, really proud of the work that the Terner Center has been able to do in these 10 years. The inspiring thing to me that Terner has done is really beef up the curriculum around housing development and real estate development and inspire people to go into the field. We've churned out students who are next generation of leaders, as Don did at Bridge.
Don became much more than a mentor. He became a best friend and family member.
For Don, it was always about the people. Give them a chance, and they can make an incredible contribution.
The next time you see someone who's homeless, look them in the eye. Understand that they're people too, who are suffering deeply. Our society is too rich, too prosperous, to turn a blind eye to this shame. Together, we must not allow the politicians to dismiss this. This is something that is vital to the survival of all Americans.
We'll talk in a moment about some of the ways in which our innovators today are carrying that spirit of Don forward. But before we move into our keynote and our panel, I am very pleased to be able to announce the formal launch of the Terner Student Fellowship. This is intended to celebrate and build on that rich legacy of Don Terner. And I'm pleased to say that starting this fall, we will be able to begin supporting the next generation of leaders in housing through a series of scholarships that will open new doors to training here at Berkeley for up-and-coming individuals who might not otherwise consider graduate study. And then while they're here at Berkeley, offer them best-of-class mentorship, support, connections to some of the most dynamic organizations around the Bay and Northern California to help them not only gain those technical skills they need to advance the fields of affordable housing and real estate finance, but perhaps to shake it up a little bit too while they're at it. I want to thank right now a few of our founding supporters who have already stepped forward with commitments to anchor this new fellowship program, specifically EAH Housing, Century Housing, Burbank Housing, as well as Ron and Mary Nahas and Bridge Housing. We're thrilled to have these initial supporters on board and can't wait to see the program begin. Laura Hall, where are you? Laura, come on in. Fantastic Laura Hall from EAH Housing is here to say a few words about her organization and the launch of this new partnership. Thank you, Laura, for your support.
Thanks again, Ben. This is very exciting. Good evening, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here tonight with all of you. As Ben mentioned, I'm Laura Hall, President and CEO of EAH Housing. I am also a very proud Cal alum. Go Bears! At EAH, we develop, manage, own, and advocate for affordable housing. Our team of more than 700 serves over 25,000 residents across 200 communities in California and in Hawaii. In addition, we have over $3 billion in our development pipeline. But as we all know, delivering affordable housing at scale requires more than a strong pipeline. It requires exceptional people. Our industry's future depends on us to invest in the next generation of leaders, to finance, build, and operate it. With this focus on people at our core, EAH Housing, a supporter of the Terner Center for years, is so proud to be part of tonight's launch of the new Terner Student Fellowship. Oh, so awesome. We are very excited. Terner Center programs always attract outstanding students who are not only passionate about the mission, they're incredibly capable, and they're also deeply committed to their work. And I know we have some here tonight. Yes? Yeah? And also, when talent is as limited as capital is, it's very important for these programs to exist so they can help speed up our pipelines. So I want to thank Ben and the Terner Center and the Terner Scholarship for Fellowship now. That's awesome. We also really look forward to this effort, and I'm excited to see what it happens and meet all the new students that are coming our way. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. That was really moving. So I would be remiss not to mention that today, in fact, happens to be Big Give 2026, the one day of the year where Berkeley takes a moment to make a little victory lap on all the good things we're doing, and offer up an opportunity for all of us in the extended Berkeley community to contribute to our favorite Berkeley causes. I don't know about you, but my email inbox has been flooded with all kinds of opportunities, and I encourage you to pick one of those, or find one if you haven't, to support. And in particular, if any of you are interested in supporting our new venture through the Terner Student Fellowship, we do have some flyers at the door, and Jesse here is happy to take your credit card. Okay, thank you. With that, let's get going. I appreciate your patience. I'm going to introduce my colleague, Carolina Reed. Carolina is the Donald Terner Distinguished Professor of City and Regional Planning here at the College of Environmental Design, and is the Faculty and Research Advisor here at the Terner Center. She is also a leading scholar nationally in the areas of housing and community development, urban poverty, homelessness, inequality. Her work has always been at the cutting edge of innovation and practice, and there is no one more fitted to get us started today framing out the challenges we face. Carolina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you all for coming. It's so exciting to see so many people here across generations, across people who knew Don and new students. I really struggled with what I wanted to say today. I don't think anybody in this room needs me to tell you that California has an affordability crisis, and I have exactly 10 minutes to talk about the affordability crisis. So I decided that in preparing my remarks, I would dig deep into the state archives and try and find out what Don Terner would have said if he were keynoting this event. I was really curious to see how he understood the challenges that he was facing in the 1970s and 80s, what led him to do his innovative work at Bridge and at HCD. And I was curious whether or not the things he said about housing would resonate today. So let's begin. So in 1977, Don Terner wrote, "Housing is a problem that now affects a majority of Californians." Check. There is little or no confidence that the natural path of events will eliminate or even mitigate it. Check. Thus, it looms as an increasingly volatile political issue for the future. Oof, that really resonates. It's not totally surprising that housing emerged as a key concern for Don. This is one of my favorite data charts. It is data compiled by Robert Shiller, the economist. And what he did is he tracked house prices all the way back to 1890. And just to orient you to how to read the graph, the 100 is the baseline price. And when the blue line goes above 100, it means house prices went up. And when the blue line dips below the 100, it means house prices went down. And so you can see clearly the Great Depression, oops, there we go, here. So when Don started his housing work, you can really see the ways in which, for the first time, after about 50 years of pretty stable house prices, there were house price increases, declines, and a steady upward pressure on housing. In observing these trends, Don wrote a lot about the implications. For example, he was concerned about the fact that homeownership was increasingly out of reach for working class families, noting that most first-time homebuyers in California couldn't afford a median value new home of $54,000. If anyone is curious, that works out to about $300,000 today. Meanwhile, the true median value in California is closer to $765,000. He was also deeply concerned about the shortage of affordable rental homes and the impacts of that lack of affordability on displacement, the environment, and jobs. He wrote, "Working men and women are being pushed further and further to the periphery of our cities. The commutes to work from those outlying suburbs, often with cars traveling slower than you can walk, polluting all the way, are devastating to the workforce." And he highlighted the consequences of these trends for homelessness. Indeed, in 1989, he described homelessness as the most pressing housing problem facing the country. His writings during this time also highlighted his frustration with the federal government and its unwillingness to adequately fund rental assistance, public housing, affordable housing preservation, and in more colorful language than I'll use here, saw this lack of support for housing as truly criminal. Also prophetic. But while the themes he raised remain deeply familiar, I would argue that the housing crisis today is not the same as the one he was writing about. First, while the 1980s and 70s and 80s showed early signs of rising home prices, the last 25 years have been defined not only by extraordinary price growth, but also incredible volatility. That volatility has produced uneven outcomes across households, allowing some to build enormous wealth while making housing feel increasingly precarious for others. Renters are particularly squeezed. This graph shows two lines, again indexed to 100. The dotted line is incomes, and the red line is renters' expenditures on housing. So what they are actually paying for housing as a share of their total income. And one of the things that's interesting about this graph is that until recently, households generally adapted their housing expenses to align with their incomes. You can see that the two lines are very similar up till about 2011. Today, across the income spectrum, that's no longer possible. Since 2011, renters have had to devote a greater share of their income for rent. And when Don Terner warned that housing would loom as an increasingly volatile issue for the future, he was right. Housing has become one of the most contentious policy debates, with deep-seated disagreements about policy solutions, particularly when it relates to housing supply. I was on a call yesterday where they shared that a recent political poll found that while 90% of Americans are concerned about housing affordability, 80% oppose building more supply, especially in their own communities. There's also a fundamental mismatch between the time it's going to take for supply to have its price effects and the real crunch households are facing right now. Two additional challenges have entered the affordability story, things that probably weren't as squarely on the horizon when Don was writing. The first is climate change. Climate change poses an unprecedented threat to housing security and affordability. Research shows that in 2021 alone, natural disasters affected roughly 1 in 10 homes, causing nearly $60 billion in damage and displacing more than 500,000 people. Beyond the impacts of the direct impacts of climate change, rising insurance premiums and energy costs are steadily eroding housing affordability. The second challenge is the limited toolkit we've had for adding more affordable supply. Don anticipated the decline of public housing and helped to lead the early efforts to build housing using the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, the most important source of funding we have today to build new affordable housing. In some ways, the program has been a huge success, building more than 3 million homes nationally since its inception in 1987. Some research we've done at Terner also shows the real benefits of these homes on things like household stability and children's educational outcomes for kids. Sorry, dry mouth. But as other funding streams have disappeared, we are starting to ask LIHTC to do far more than it was designed to do. Address homelessness, counter residential segregation, pay for cities, parks and transportation infrastructure, achieve LEED Platinum ratings, while also solving large-scale affordable housing shortages, and all without nearly enough subsidy to go around. In this process, we've built a system that is extraordinarily complicated and as a result also extremely expensive. And one of the things that Terner has researched over the years is the cost to build affordable housing. This slide shows you of LIHTC projects from 2010, let me get my little clicker here, from 2010 to 2025. The dots show the distribution of per unit development costs for each of those LIHTC projects. So one dot is one LIHTC project. And you can see that in 2010, 2011, most costs were between about $250,000 and $750,000 per unit. Today, we're still building some units at a lower cost, but the top bar has gone to $1 million, 2.5 million per unit. These collective challenges, some old, some new, will be hard to address. But in my digging into the archives, I also learned that Don Terner always ended his speeches with optimism, that we could and would find solutions. And we are. Over the last 10 years, we've seen the state take a proactive step towards increasing the supply of housing and reducing the power of exclusionary communities to say no to housing. For example, ADUs are now a significant share of the housing stock in California. And while recent CEQA reforms in SB 79 will take longer to show an impact, the state is moving in the right direction. And we're seeing new innovative models emerge. We're exploring what it might look like to develop social housing in California. We're reimagining vouchers and rental assistance so that they're more effective. We're building permanent supportive housing to address homelessness, using modular construction and streamlined financing mechanisms to bring down the costs. And environmental justice organizations are working with low-income communities to retrofit their homes to make them more energy efficient and climate resilient. There's a lot to be excited about. So I'm going to end with a final Terner quote. These innovations were all done by people like yourselves who believed in their own power and who would not accept the conventional wisdom, who could not accept the status quo of the society around them. And with that, I'm super excited to turn it over to my amazing colleague, Michelle Boyd with Terner Labs, who is going to moderate a panel focused on solutions, innovations, and doing things differently. Thank you.
It's hard to follow Carolina. It always is. Well, thank you for having us. I'm extremely excited to be alongside this panel. As a quick mode of introduction, I'm Michelle Boyd. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at Terner Labs, where I oversee programming and growth for the organization. I once was a graduate student at Berkeley who worked at Terner while I was a graduate student and never left. Students rock. And I am really excited to be here today with this wonderful panel. Our goal here is to talk and inspire about these amazing things that are happening here in California and nationally, and how we can take these innovations, which sometimes may feel small, but really take them and think about them at the scale that Don Terner operated on, looking at the entire breadth of the housing crisis, the housing shortage that we face, and think about what it would take to actually make a difference. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce the people here beside me. So first, just to make sure I don't make any mistakes, is Apoorva Pasricha, who's the Chief Operating Officer at Cloud Apartments, an organization that has been through our Housing Venture Lab program, and brings incredible experience in reducing construction costs and using factory-built housing and actually achieving the outcomes and the promise that it offers. She brings experience at roles across tech and City of San Jose, State of Massachusetts, and we're really excited to have you here. And I want to also introduce Rebecca Foster, who runs a Housing Accelerator Fund, who has helped achieve some of the things that were just talked about at bringing affordable housing at scale, bringing industrialized construction, which he will talk about, and public financing and innovation. Also, Ashwin Warrior, who's the Director of Housing at the Center for Public Exercise. That'd be a fun name. The Center for Public Enterprise, which is helping scale social housing models and innovative financing structures across the country. Really excited to have you here. And Kim Chai, who's the Chief of Staff. I just gave you a promotion. At Infilla, and she'll talk a lot. She'll tell you about how they are transforming the permitting environment in California and nationally with technology. So we're really excited to have you all here today. So the first question that I want to ask everybody is that what is your definition of whatever it takes in housing? What is we are sitting here in Don Terner's legacy. What does that mean to you? And first, I want to go to Ashwin.
Yeah, no, first of all, I just want to say it's such an honor and a pleasure to be here. Came out from Washington, D.C., but grew up in the Bay Area, so it's special to be back here on Berkeley's campus. Center for Public Enterprise, we really focus on figuring out ways in which public investment and increased public capacity for financing and development can help us get more of what we feel society needs, which is affordable housing, green infrastructure and energy, as well as public infrastructure for things like public transit. So a lot of the way that I think about whatever it takes is through the lens of the public sector. And I really see it as a call for innovation. I think it's a recognition that what we have done up to this point, as Carolina sort of showed, has not solved the problem, that there is an impetus on the public sector particularly to rethink the ways in which we interact with the housing markets and shape the housing markets in order to achieve the goals. If you think about it, we need anywhere from 2 to 7 million new homes to be able to make a dent in our housing shortage. So I also think more broadly for housers, it's a call to innovation and a call to action to think about as many broad-based solutions as we can. There's not going to be any one silver bullet. That's why we've got 4 fantastic speakers here today, because there's so many different lenses through which you can attack this. What we focus on is really thinking about what is the role for the public sector when it comes to financing and development.
Speaking of public sector work, Kim, if you'd like to go next.
Oh, yeah. So at Philo, we focus on the permitting process. And so for those of you who are lucky enough to be unfamiliar with the pains and struggles of the permitting process, it's really difficult and it's really long. And the difficulty in terms of opaque processes means that the risk and the cost for developers and funders goes up as complexities go up. And so this is one of the biggest bottlenecks in housing production today. And so at Infilo, we're focused on making the process clearer, more transparent, and faster for staff and applicants. And so when thinking about the ways that cities are currently understaffed and lacking the capacity to deal with existing backlog and then manage current workloads, we think about software as a way to superpower them and enable them to actually focus on higher level thinking. And so when we think about whatever it takes, it means attacking this, when you live in Silicon Valley, like somewhat unsexy problem of real government, real people, real problems, and not enterprise SaaS. It's a little bit different, and we think of it as sitting in these offices, getting to know these staff, seeing how their processes work, and then delivering systems that actually work for them the way they think instead of delivering software that they're forced to use. And that takes time and a lot of trust building.
Apoorva?
Great. Our angle of looking at whatever it takes is really focused on how do we reduce construction costs. So I don't think it's news to anyone that our construction costs are rising at the pace that they are. And if you really ask and inquire why, you have labor shortages, you have labor costs rising, you have interest rates rising, you have tariffs, you have regulatory reasons why doing development is extremely expensive. And so when we think about whatever it takes, we've spent a lot of time thinking about how to use industrialized construction as a way to reduce costs, specifically with a focus on labor costs. And industrialized construction, the idea of building homes and factories is not new. And our version of whatever it takes is really about making it a reality in this country. We've seen it be successful in Sweden. We've seen it be successful in Japan. And we really believe that it's not the actual process and the technology of doing work in the factory that's not working. It's how we choose to execute it. And so our version of whatever it takes is really finding a way to make that happen. And we recognize that it in itself is not going to be a silver bullet to solving the housing crisis. And I think all the folks on the panel here are addressing it from different angles, but we're in a desperate situation, and what that functionally means is that we have to approach the problem and look at the root cause of the problem in so many different angles.
Yeah, and I think it's a great handoff to you, Rebecca, who both have worked across using public systems and public resources and industrialized construction to tie it together a little bit. What does it mean to you?
Yes, so the Housing Accelerator Fund, we exist at, I would say, the intersection of public and private sectors, and our main levers for helping to move forward housing solutions are capital and the money, which is really important for projects, and relationships. And really, relationships also, I think, might get undernamed, but this is super complicated, and getting hard things done really requires leveraging the strength of relationships and doing everything we can with those. So I would say for us, whatever it takes means being very clear-eyed about what our North Star goals are, which are delivering more affordable housing faster. And then through that lens, yes, there's a lot, we have to layer in every single a part of innovation, but we have to filter it through every time. Is this going to contribute to delivering more housing faster and at a lower cost? And I think we can often forget that, like, our capital is, how we deploy our capital is really a reflection of our values. And if our most important priority is accelerating the delivery of housing, we probably can have 2 more priorities, but we can't have 30. And so we really need to continue to come back to that. And what we try to do as a capital partner is help all of the partners who are building, providing the industrialized construction solutions, our public sector partners, continue to provide them with the push to stay true to those values, and also the fuel, the capital fuel, to be able to actually deliver on those values, because it's hard.
So this is all great in theory. I mean that these are things we can say and we can talk about, but being able to put them into practice is really, really hard. So I'm hoping that we can ask each of you to try and give a concrete example of something where you've seen, whether it's exactly what we've spoken about or just something else that you've seen that's really working, that has the potential to work at scale. And I actually want to talk with you go first, Kim, because I've been really inspired about the work coming out of Infilla recently.
Thank you for that. I'll talk about one of our first and my favorite customer, Permit Sonoma, which handles the permitting for unincorporated Sonoma County. And so over the last year, we worked alongside the staff to digitize and simplify their licensing permitting product and process. And so by bringing that online and actually encoding the logic and the rules and making that very clear for all applicants, we were able to improve complete applications by 45% and save 30 to 40 hours of measurable staff time every week that was previously spent processing these applications, chasing applicants for incomplete applications, and focusing on all of these minute tasks that really build up and take away from their other capacity to be able to serve their communities in the planning development. So that's something I've seen in terms of what we've been able to do. And then we've just recently wrapped up a new project where we consolidated the 7 to 10 separate permits you would need to hold a special events there into one application form and one permit. That took a lot of time. That took sitting in their office, going up to Sonoma County, having working group sessions every week, which when you work with civil staff who have really busy schedules and are understaffed and overworked is a lot to ask. And so all of that didn't come without the blood, sweat, and tears from the staff side and our side of trying to figure out a clearer process for the applicants. And so when thinking about how that scales, I think all municipalities, like you think of the city of San Francisco and then you think about Richmond, California. Those look very different on the outside and the inside, but their processes have similarities that when you're building software around them can be carried through. And like that's the scalable part, whereas the human part is not, which is my favorite part.
But what's the constraint to scaling? So I've heard you speak about the complexity that exists in some of these cities that you walk into. So software is obviously not a solution in its own. What is the work that you're doing alongside cities, and what that either may constrain you from scaling or in some ways could be your secret sauce?
Yeah. The secret sauce, which is the last part of that, I think is the fact that we really, really care and we want to build software around how they think and how they work now. Like I brought this up earlier, but it really is key to how we think about it, in that a lot of the systems and a lot of the tools that they've been given to do this really painful work are really antiquated and don't serve them in the ways that they need. And so that's our secret sauce, to end with that. But to talk about what the limitations are, I mean, again, they're understaffed and overworked. So when you're asking for an hour up front every week for a month to be able to simplify this process, to be able to build it into a software instead of a paper form, you have to really be able to explain and have them trust that this upfront cost will be well worth the payoff. And so I think it's been really beneficial to be able to point to wonderful case studies like Sonoma County and be like, look, like they, maybe at the beginning they were like, oh, another meeting and another software. But then once they started using it, you see the value develop so quickly. So that kind of combats the limitations around the need to really sit down and understand the legislation. And as someone who has personally dealt with the 40-page PDF of impact fees in San Francisco, like there is a lot of legwork, and it takes a lot of time on our team to even sit down and really understand things. Like I have to call a planner and be like, what does section 424.5 mean for this impact fee, and how do I build it into this calculator? But once it's done, it's in there. And once it's in there, it can be used by the staff and the applicants over and over and over again. So I'm really excited about that.
So thank you for talking through some of these difficulties of the city. Ashwin, I'm hoping you can talk, you guys work a lot with like state HFAs and other finance agencies. If you can talk similarly about the work that they're trying to do and how you help them achieve their mission.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say I've been really jaded the last couple of weeks on like the tech adoption and artificial intelligence, so whether it's really adding any value, but seeing these sort of concrete examples is fantastic. So amazing work. Yeah, a lot of my work is working directly with public agencies, so public housing authorities and also housing finance agencies all across the country. I wanted to share a little bit of what we're seeing as like a new wave of innovation, specifically at that housing finance agency level. If you aren't familiar with what a housing finance agency is, every state has one. They're functionally like a public bank that does lending for affordable housing and helps it get built all across the country. They also play a really important role in administering low-income housing tax credits. As Carolina pointed out, is one of the main ways that we build affordable housing in this country. And they're all running up against a somewhat similar challenge, which is sort of twofold. One is those affordable housing tax credits are a scarce resource, and they're using them all up. They're oftentimes 3, 4, 5 times oversubscribed in terms of the demand for these tax credits and the projects that they have in their pipeline. And the second point is that they're also experiencing housing affordability challenges that are rising up the income ladder. It's no longer just extremely low income, very low income households. As sort of Don Terner's legacy points to, it's also middle income, upper income households who are also feeling this squeeze. So what we've been seeing as a new trend is state housing finance agencies trying to answer a slightly different question, which is how much additional affordability can I get once I've other scarce federal resources. And they've zeroed in on a set of financing programs that are tailored to try and unstick what would otherwise be stalled market rate projects using short-term debt and equity investments to help move those projects forward in exchange for a small amount of affordability. It can kind of be helpful maybe just to explain a little bit, put yourself in the shoes of a market rate developer to understand why this would be important. Like if you want to build a market rate apartment, you're typically going to go to a bank and get a loan for roughly 60% of the total development costs. You'll probably put in some of your own money, sort of skin in the game, cash equity into the deal. But the other part, maybe 20 to 30%, you're going out to private investment to get that money. And oftentimes that comes from private equity, limited partner equity, which requires double-digit returns. And if you can't meet those returns through the rents that you're charging or through other operational efficiencies, that project just doesn't get built, and that housing doesn't, filter into the community. So what a lot of these housing finance agencies are doing and have realized is that taking this idea of what would happen if we took the private equity out of the equation and substituted in lower cost public capital. And in exchange, we would like to see what society needs, which is additional affordable housing. I mean, if that money can come in for a shorter period of time and then rotate out once the project is completed, it can be put forward to other projects throughout the state. A number of states have set up these revolving loan funds. New York, Massachusetts, Michigan. I think Oregon is the latest. A bill passed in the House and Senate just the other week that would send it to the governor's desk. So there's plenty of potential. I think one of the best examples might be Massachusetts, where with $50 million that was appropriated from the legislature, they were able to identify thousands of projects all across the state that were in this sort of limbo stage where they had their permitting, they had the entitlements, they'd gone through a lot of the hard part, they just couldn't close on that last piece of equity financing. So with that $50 million, they've been able to build a pipeline that they estimate is going to help build about 1,000 units every year going forward. But crucially, the piece that has allowed these innovations to sort of spread like wildfire is that they don't need to rely on low-income housing tax credits or tax-exempt bonds or other traditional scarce federal resources. This is additive production. So when you think about scaling these types of programs, what we're seeing is this early stage innovation from the public sector, figuring out new ways to interact with the market and with different actors. This is truly more of a public-private partnership that we think has a lot of potential to scale up and address some of our affordability challenges.
Thank you. And I think it really relates to Rebecca, where I know that I think you want to go next. HAF has been a leader in putting public resources and private resources and combining them in really creative ways. I hope you can talk a little bit about the success that you've seen and where you think you might be going next.
Yes, and I also wanted to say, because our first one was like 60 seconds, I just want to take a pause to say it's such an honor to be here. And I did not get to work with Don Terner, but pretty much all of my mentors did, many of whom are in the room. Whether or not you know you're a mentor, you are. So I feel that like the ripple in the pond that I think Rick said on the video, like that, I feel honored to be part of the ripple, and I couldn't imagine a better industry and set of peers and colleagues to be working in than in affordable housing, even though it's hard. We can do it together when it's hard. So yes, I mean, an interesting complement to what you were just talking through with Ashwin with the housing authorities. I think so. One thing that we have successfully launched in the last couple of years is called the Bay Area Housing Innovation Fund, and it is designed to be a 2.0 version of a picture that Carolina had up there of a project that was a modular project in San Francisco we worked on with the help of some folks here, totally focused on the North Star goals of delivering housing, permanent supportive housing for under $400,000 a unit in less than 3 years in the heart of San Francisco, with the clear perspective that we can never address our homelessness crisis if we cannot deliver permanent supportive housing much faster and at a much lower cost than what the status quo had been. And we did it, and we used every tool we could in the toolkit. It was off-site modular, totally streamlined, and we had a giant once-in-a-lifetime grant that helped us provide the risk capital to make that happen. And after we finished, we said, we're probably not going to get another grant like that in our organization's lifetime. How can we do this in ways that are scalable with money that can be paid back, and at the same time change some of the government approaches so that this can be easier to do with public sector funds? And the Innovation Fund is part of that 2.0 version, and the intention of the fund is to replace a competitive source of government funding with 22-year second mortgage capital, so below your senior debt, getting a share of project cash flow. So we take some risk on returns alongside the project, but unlike a government lender, yes.
Can you explain that one more time in slightly more simple language?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So we take a riskier position than the senior debt in the project. We come in and we fund from construction through the stabilized life of the project, so for 20 years, and that is generally a position that government debt takes, oftentimes and never is repaid. In this case, we had to thread the needle to be repaid because we're trying to tap into corporate and philanthropic balance sheets where they're making an investment, and albeit a concessionary impact investment over 20 years. One of our largest anchor investors is Apple, and they're making this investment from their corporate treasury. And they are okay with getting a little below a treasury level return, but they expect to get their money back. And that can unlock more scale. So we have some philanthropic capital and our own equity that takes some top loss to make the program work better. But the bulk of the capital, Apple and Sobrado is the other big philanthropic investor. They get a concessionary return and they get their funds back. And so we had to thread this needle so they're taking that project cash flow risk alongside the developer and alongside the local government, but we're in we take less risk than the government, but we're taking more risk than the bank. And that structure, we can provide these loans alongside a commitment from the developer that they will deliver at 30% cost and time savings. And now we have much more of a track record, which is so exciting. So I'm hoping we're going to see Carolina's chart in the next few years. Like, we're going to see that line come down on cost, because it really, in the last 3 years alone, the number of developer partners that we're working with, somewhat by necessity, because local subsidy is so scarce. Our state has a budget deficit. Our cities have budget deficits. They don't have the gap money to put into housing projects in the same way that they have in better times. So we have to be delivering housing for much lower costs, and that requires faster too, because time is money. So if we can't do that, then we just won't ever get the shovels in the ground. So this product is, I think, to your question, Michelle, we're trying to say, like, what role can tax credits play? What role can the power of the tax base and the public subsidy play? And they should play those roles and play them, and we should tap into them as much as we possibly can. And then we should use private and philanthropic capital to really unlock what can't be unlocked by our government partners, so we can do more.
A lot of people talk about industrialized construction. Rebecca is talking about it. And I bet there are plenty of people in this room who have considered using it and not been able to, or maybe did not achieve the outcomes that they thought, achieve the outcomes that they thought they would. You have been really deep in the trenches trying to make these projects happen and actually deliver on the cost and time savings they've promised. Can you talk a little bit about how you've made that happen, what's inspiring you, what keeps getting you ready to wake up and continue to fight that work?
Yeah. Maybe I'll start with setting some context on what our observation was about doing modular when we first started as a company about 4.5 years ago. So we saw that modular and industrialized construction was not delivering on the cost savings that it was promising to everyone, which is what created a lot of skepticism in the industry around it. And when we probed as to why, we looked at budgets, we talked to subcontractors, we looked at factories. What we found was that it's not what happens in the factory that prevents the cost savings from happening. It's what happens after that. You can bring boxes onto a site, but there's a lot of work that still has to happen after. You have to stack them, you have to finish them. And it's all of the work in the field that's actually what's preventing cost savings from being realized in modular. And if you look at a budget today, for a modular project, about a third falls into the factory and about 2/3 falls into the field. So to create cost savings, all of the efficiencies that you get in the factory they're lost in the field. And so you have to focus on standardization in the field. You have to focus on pricing and transparency in the field. And if I were to look at, how does a project get priced in modular traditionally? You want to build something modular, and we actually had this with a 16-story tower that we were pricing back in the day. We wanted to build it modular, and what we found was that subcontractors didn't know how to price it out. You tell them that you want to build a building modular, they might take what they believe to be a $10 million job for themselves and just say, oh, it's modular, let me knock it off by a couple million, and that's how I'll build the multifamily building. And so what happens in pricing and what happens in budgets is that there's a layer of risk that is baked into all of the estimates that are ever given to you. And so until we can create pricing transparency, creating the cost savings is very difficult. And so our approach at Cloud, and this is where we came in and said, well, what is the role that we want to play in the industry? And what we focused on was actually not standardizing the unit layout, but standardizing how it gets assembled. So we've standardized the building system itself, which is really focused on the costs in the field that are creating bloat on construction budgets. And so by doing that, and then what we're doing is partnering with factories, general contractors, subcontractors to do the actual delivery. So we're taking standardization of the assemblies, and then we are taking a partnership approach to delivery. And the way we've seen that be successful, and it's been actually really interesting because I think at the end of the day, we're doing a lot of change management in the industry. We're going to subcontractors and essentially asking them to price something that they have known to price in a very specific way for the last many, many years and saying, hey, we want you to do this differently. And it's working. The question, I think the question you were posing was, is it scaling? And I think we're at the early stages of that. But what we've seen is in San Jose recently, we looked at a 300-unit project. And when we priced it just using traditional methods for specifically the scopes that are the most expensive on site, the 10 million number that I came from that, when we priced it using the cloud system and using the cloud approach where we're actually telling subcontractors to look at every hookup, every connection so that they understand their scope really well, that cost went from 10 million to 5 million on the same project. So what we're finding is working is standardization of assemblies, but also spending the time to actually do the change management and build relationships and partnerships where we're creating trust in the system as opposed to coming in and waltzing in saying, hey, we're the tech company, this is how you should do this work. And so that's really where we've spent a lot of time focusing.
Great. I mean, I think it's inspiring. I think the stories that you've come out of like really getting in there. And it's been really cool to be able to watch you do that. So speaking about change management, one thing I know we wanted to talk about, and you guys have each talked about it, so maybe I'll just invite a little bit of a follow-up. We've talked a lot about the public sector. And Rebecca, you spoke about particularly how the public sector needs to use its resources in the way it's designed. I wonder if you could speak a little bit more, especially as we see our tax credit environment changing and the financing changing, how you see the role for the public sector shifting in order to embrace its whatever it takes mentality.
Yes, so it's a really hard time to be running a state or local government right now with the significant uncertainty from federal sources and cuts and budget deficits. And one silver lining for our industry that we got last summer as part of the big federal bill is that something that affordable housing advocates have been wanting for a decade, which is change in the way tax credits are allocated in states. And the gating item for the gating tool for getting for getting low-income housing tax credits is your allocation of these private activity bonds. They are capped in states, and when you reach your cap, it's a scarce resource. You can't get more 4% low-income. You can't get more low-income housing tax credits, and the way that that's calculated is you previously have had to have, Michelle told me to explain this, so I'm trying to do the best job I can. You previously had to have 50% of your project had to be funded with this scarce resource, these bonds, in order to get tax credits. The change is now only 25% of your project has to be funded with this scarce resource, which basically means we have a doubling in supply of low-income housing tax credits. And while that's hurt the pricing some because supply and demand, it actually means that this very scarce resource that has been a huge bottleneck and source of uncertainty for projects now is way less of a scarce resource. And if you know what your project's going to score, you have pretty good certainty, and we're still working, it's new, that of whether or not you're going to be able to get these incredibly valuable, the source of equity that we use for projects that are up to about 60% of area median income. So alongside that, our state government is, with help from the Terner Center, is consolidating and streamlining its agencies and funding sources for affordable housing, which also has been a long time needed. And there could be an opportunity for us to really fund way more of our 60% area median income projects, which is a huge swath of the housing that is needed in our state, with these low-income housing tax credits and a reliable fixed-rate senior loan and a second mortgage product that might be concessionary but does deliver a return, and have a way simpler capital stack with...
What's that compared to? Like, what is it?
And that might be compared to 12 layers of funding, which the Terner Center did a report on. Each additional layer adds about $20,000 a unit. So it's this, like, can be a positive cycle or a negative cycle, where the more your project costs, the more sources of funding you need, and then your project starts to cost more. Or the more you can bring the cost down of your project, the fewer sources of funding capital you need, and then your project can get done with at a lower cost. So if we can, depending on the rents in our different markets, I think there is a real opportunity, and we're seeing it on a project we're working on together and other projects that we're funding in the Bay Area. If we can get projects down to $500,000 a unit or less, you can have a really simple capital stack, and you don't need gap funding, which comes with additional strings. And then we can really use that scarce gap funding for the extremely low income, supportive housing where it is the most needed, and then and get more of this 60% AMI and up housing done with tax credits and private and philanthropic capital, which could unlock tens of thousands more units if we can, pull all those pieces together.
We're painting a rosy picture here, right? And people in the audience know how hard it is to actually make this happen. So I want to invite you, as we bring to a close, for you to each take a moment and maybe touch on, what do you think we're still avoiding? What's maybe one assumption that we still need to reconsider if we're really serious about whatever it takes? Or maybe if another prompt is, if it's 2035 and we are looking back as this is the series of years in which the trajectory shifted. And the chart is different. The chart is different. This is the time when we changed housing affordability. What happened? What changed? With that really easy question, I want to start with you, Kim.
Okay, I'll take it. I think letting go of the belief that more process means better outcomes. A lot of the times in the municipalities that we work with, city, county, state level, et cetera, everyone has the best intentions, but over time, these processes become so bloated and so complex that even people who've worked at departments for 25 years have questions and confused about how to navigate them. And so I think if you're thinking we're in 2035 and we're looking back and everything has changed and I can buy a house in the Bay Area, I think we need to have processes that are rigorous, yes, in terms of making sure the environment is protected, the communities are safe, all of these things, but also legible in the way that applicants know exactly what the rules are and exactly what the requirements are, and then governments can actually process projects efficiently.
I think I've heard you say that we often think complexity equals rigor, and that is not always true.
Yeah, that is not always true.
It's not always true. Great. Apoorva, how about you?
I think that if we are doing this right, specifically with regards to industrialized construction especially, I think we will have taken a systems approach to it. And what I mean by that is sometimes I feel like I sit in a bubble in an isolated corner doing innovation. And I think when I think about the places where it's been successful, it's the regulatory bodies, it's the financing organizations that have also evolved the ecosystem around it to support innovation from actually scaling. So I would love to walk into a conversation with a lender and not have the first conversation be coming from a position of weakness, which is, industrialized construction has failed. These are the reasons. This is why. I would love to shift that entire narrative, and would love to see that narrative shift so that we're talking about it through the lens of how do you actually make it happen, not let me overcome the initial skepticism around it. And I think to get there, we need an investment across the entire ecosystem to push things forward.
I want to say Aporv has been a really great asset, along with other folks in this room, in a policy momentum that has been building in the state of California to change the regulatory environment to make industrialized construction easier. So there's maybe some hope there.
I'm not doing the hard work. The Turner Center came out with the report that highlights exactly how I think this ecosystem actually does need to change. And when we reflect on the role that government can play and how important it is for government to help actually seed the innovation that's happening, to support factories from not failing, to create demand aggregation so that factories feel like they have a strong pipeline that they can actually lean on. So I think it's a big kudos to everyone in this room who's been involved in creating that.
Talk to you, Rebecca. Or Rebecca, how about you go next?
Okay. So I'll do one that I think I don't have any control over, but I do think it is worth, and then a real one with maybe slightly more potential. I mean, the one thing we don't talk about that much in housing is the incomes, like the income side of the equation, and the rents that people can afford to pay. And as we saw on the charts, and we know from our lives and our communities and our friends, there is incomes and wealth have increasingly become farther and farther apart. And there's just some level where no matter how much we bring down costs for housing, if we can't actually change the way that income and wealth is distributed and is earned in our country, we will never be able to end poverty through housing policy. So I do think that that is, so yes, I would love for, so massive tax reform, but I don't think that's as likely. So, but we can keep working on it. Otherwise, I would say, in absent that, this is our collective responsibility, and we all know this in this room, and I would love to see even more, we have, in the state of California, corporations that are massive employers here and have headquarters here have over $3 trillion on their corporate treasury balance sheets, and they cannot buy back enough shares to use that money. So I think more investments from that capital in affordable housing in our communities will be good for them. So I think we need more of that. And similarly, trillions of dollars in donor-advised funds and in philanthropic sources. So alongside the work we need to do from a policy and government perspective, I think much more gigantic, significant shared responsibility in very large, meaningful ways to bolster these public-private partnerships that can meaningfully make the concessionary investments in scaling affordable housing.
Good applause for that. Ashwin, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, sure. So you asked about something that we don't necessarily talk about all the time, and something that I think about a lot is sort of the unstated or sometimes stated tension of what we expect housing to accomplish in this country. Because on the one hand, we talk about it many times as an ever-appreciating asset and a source of wealth building. But we also want it to be abundant, widely accessible, and affordable. And in many cases, those two things are actually in contradiction. You can't have an appreciating asset unless there's some element of scarcity. And this isn't to say that we should move away from home ownership or ownership options. What I think is more interesting to think about is what are the actual pieces of home ownership that are so compelling, especially in the American psyche. And part of that is the asset appreciation, but I think another part of it is the long-term stability, as well as the feeling and connection to community. When I think many years down the line, I think it would be interesting to see some progression and how we can start making a little bit more of daylight between those things. You can have a rental household that has secure tenure that would give you a similar form of stability that a 30-year mortgage might. You could think about alternate ways to provide for savings accounts or tenant equity vehicles so that you can get a modest appreciation, or shared equity models to get a modest appreciation without necessarily needing to focus on a more like a zero-sum game. And there's other ways to sort of incentivize, I think, community investment so that the benefits that accrue through property appreciation are shared more equitably throughout society as well.
Well, it has been an honor to bring this group together and to really look at the intersections across housing, across permitting, city government, public resources at state and cities, and thinking about reducing the cost. I hope that all of you have found something that is inspiring or motivating in your work, and something that can help inspire you to each carry forward in Don Terner's legacy, as we do here at Turner Center and Labs. And thank you all for being with us tonight.